Welcome back to Wisdom Unveiled. For anyone just joining us, this is where we like to take these deep dives into these fascinating topics. And today we're going to be looking at the really captivating world of Rumi's philosophy. Just a quick memo before we start. These are, translated conversations from Farsi, so there might be, some little things that are a little bit lost in translation.
Yeah, that's an important point to make. Translating, these complex philosophical ideas, especially from mystical texts like Rumi's poetry, is always a challenge.
For sure. So we've got a lot to unpack today. We're on episode 14 of our 40-episode journey through Marifat. And today we're going to be diving deep into Rumi's perspective on the senses. Now, I think we all know about the basic five senses, right? But Rumi kind of takes it a step further, and he hints at these five senses beyond the five senses, which is often interpreted as like a reference to spiritual senses or like a deeper, more intuitive way of like perceiving reality.
It's a really fascinating concept, and it really challenges us to kind of rethink how we experience the world.
It does. I mean, just think about it for a sec. What if there's more to reality than what we can just see or hear or touch or taste or smell? What if there's like a whole other level of perception that we're not even aware of?
And that's exactly what Rumi, is encouraging us to explore.
Yeah.
Both Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijanii in their discussions in Marifat highlight how Rumi doesn't see our physical senses as the end of the story. Instead, he views them as like a starting point, a gateway to a deeper understanding.
So for Rumi, the journey towards knowledge, it begins with our everyday experiences, with the information that we gather through our five senses. But then he challenged us to go further, to like delve deeper. It's like he's saying, like, don't just see, observe. Don't just hear, listen. It's about engaging our senses with intention and awareness.
Yes, it's about recognizing that our senses aren't just passive receptors of information. They can become active tools for the spiritual exploration.
That's so cool. It really makes you think about the possibilities, Like, what if we could train our senses to perceive the world in a completely different way, to access like a deeper level of reality?
Well, that's what's so intriguing about Rumi's idea of these spiritual senses. He seems to be suggesting that there are other ways of knowing, other modes of perception that we can cultivate through, spiritual practice.
Okay, so I have to admit, this is starting to sound a bit mystical to me. Is Rumi suggesting that we should abandon our physical senses or try to develop some kind of supernatural ability?
Not quite. He's not saying that we should reject the physical world or our everyday experiences. Instead, he's encouraging us to go beyond the superficial, to delve deeper into the essence of things. And he clarifies that this doesn't mean literally shutting down our physical senses. It's about being mindful of what we expose ourselves to, choosing to focus on what nourishes our souls and turning away from what depletes us. You could say it's about cultivating a discerning attention.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not about sensory deprivation, but rather about, a kind of selective attention.
Exactly. Dr. Dinani uses a really powerful analogy to explain this. He compares our worldly possessions to water in a ship.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work?
Well, he says that if the water gets into the ship's hold, which represents our heart, the ship will sink. We become overwhelmed by, those possessions.
So it's like those possessions end up controlling us, weighing us down,
Yeah,
preventing us from reaching our destination.
precisely. But if the water remains outside, supporting the ship, it helps us stay afloat and reach our destination safely. So it's about using those possessions for our needs without becoming attached to them, letting them, consume us.
Wow, that's such a vivid image.
Yeah.
It makes you really think about how easily we can get caught up in material things, how they can distract us from what truly matters.
It's true. And this idea of being mindful of what we allow into our hearts and minds, of, choosing our focus wisely, ties into Rumi's famous story of the elephant in the dark room. I'm sure you've probably heard of it.
Oh, yeah. The one where different people touch different parts of the elephant in the dark and they all come up with these completely different ideas of what it is. I think anyone who's ever taken a philosophy course has heard that one.
Right. But it's a classic for a reason. It perfectly illustrates the limitations of perception when we're only relying on partial information.
Each person is using their sense of touch, but they only have access to a small piece of the puzzle.
Right.
They can't see the whole elephant, so their understanding is limited and ultimately inaccurate.
Precisely. And Rumi uses this story to highlight how limited our sensory experiences can be without the full picture. He suggests that we need a kind of light or understanding to illuminate the whole truth.
So if our physical senses alone can't give us the whole truth, what else do we need? Is he suggesting that we need something beyond our rational minds?
You're You're getting warm. This is where Rumi introduces this fascinating concept of the heart as the inner East.
The heart is the inner East. I love that.
He suggests that the heart isn't just this physical organ for pumping blood, but the source of our connection to something greater, the place where true understanding arises.
So it's like our inner compass, guiding us towards deeper truth, something beyond just our physical senses and rational thoughts.
Exactly. And the story of the elephant in the dark room can be interpreted in a few different ways, which adds another layer of depth to Rumi's message.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of these different interpretations?
Well, one way to understand it is that it emphasizes the importance of considering multiple perspectives. Each person in the story is having a valid experience based on their limited interaction with the elephant, but none of them have the complete picture.
So it's a reminder that our own perspective is just one piece of the puzzle, and that we need to be open to other viewpoints to get a more complete understanding.
Exactly. Another interpretation focuses on the limitations of language and expression. Each person in the story might be experiencing the same elephant, but they struggle to accurately communicate their experiences because their words and concepts are limited.
That's so true. Sometimes it's really hard to put our experiences into words, especially when we're trying to describe something complex or abstract.
And this is particularly relevant when it comes to trying to describe mystical experiences, which often defy easy explanation. But the interpretation I find most intriguing and most relevant to Rumi's message is that different people have different levels of understanding based on their individual capacity. This is represented by the term E, which roughly translates to manifestation in understanding.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me. EEA, what does that really mean in the context of the elephant in the dark room?
It suggests that our understanding is a reflection of our inner state, our level of spiritual development. So in the story, the person who only perceives the elephant's leg as a pillar might have a more limited understanding than the person who perceives the entire elephant as this massive creature. Their ability to perceive the truth of the situation is directly related to their inner capacity for understanding.
So it's not that one person is right and the other is wrong. It's that they're experiencing the elephant from different levels of awareness, which determines how much of the truth they can access.
Exactly. And this implies that we can actively work on expanding our capacity for understanding, just as we would train our physical senses to become more refined and discerning. We can cultivate our inner hardware, so to speak.
I love that analogy. So it's not about passively receiving information, but rather about actively cultivating our ability to perceive and understand.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this aligns perfectly with Rumi's emphasis on the importance of spiritual practice and inner work. He believed that through specific disciplines and a commitment to self-refinement, we can expand our capacity for understanding and experience the world in a more profound and meaningful way.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. So we've gone from the familiar five senses to this idea of five senses beyond the five senses, from the analogy of the ship to the elephant in the dark room. And now we're talking about the heart as the inner East, and this idea of cultivating our each. My mind is spinning.
It is a lot to unpack, isn't it? But that's what makes exploring Rumi's work so enriching. It's full of layers of meaning and insights that can transform our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
It really is. And I'm already eager to dive into the practical side of all of this. If we can cultivate our inner senses and expand our eat, how do we actually do it? What are the specific practices or techniques that Rumi suggests for embarking on this journey of spiritual growth?
That's a great question, and one that we'll be exploring in more depth as we continue our deep dive into Rumi's fascinating world. And we're back with our deep dive into Rumi's profound insights. I have to say, it's a real privilege to explore this rich material, with you and all our listeners.
Oh, I totally agree. Rumi's teachings always leave me feeling so inspired and ready to see the world with fresh eyes. Speaking of which, in the last part, we were talking about how our perception is shaped by our inner state, or as Dr. Larijanii put it so eloquently, Echo, that manifestation of understanding. It's such a profound idea. It really challenges us to actively cultivate our capacity for a deeper perception.
Yeah, and it raises the question of how do we actually, go about upgrading our inner hardware. Dr. Dinani mentioned Rumi's emphasis on spiritual practice, but what does that actually look like in everyday life? It can feel a bit abstract.
Right. It's one thing to understand the concept intellectually, but how do we put it into practice? I mean, where do we even begin?
Well, one of the key practices that Rumi emphasizes is cultivating a state of presence, of attentiveness, of truly seeing what's in front of us. It might sound simple, but it's actually quite challenging in our like fast-paced world, full of distractions.
Oh, it is. We're constantly bombarded with information, notifications, demands on our attention. It's so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind and lose sight of the present moment.
Exactly. And Rumi recognized this tendency, centuries ago. He suggests that we simplify our lives, reduce distractions and make like a conscious effort to focus on what truly matters.
So it's not just about adding more practices or rituals to our lives, but it's also about like subtracting the noise and the clutter that's preventing us from seeing clearly. It's like creating a mental and emotional space for that deeper understanding to emerge.
Precisely. And Rumi suggests that this process of simplification can actually be a form of spiritual practice in itself. It's about approaching even the most mundane tasks with a sense of awareness and presence. He was all about finding the sacred in the everyday, experiencing the divine in every moment.
Oh, I love that. It reminds me of that famous Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The difference, of course, lies in the level of awareness we bring to the task.
Yes, exactly. And this idea of bringing a heightened awareness to even the simplest activities, resonates strongly with Rumi's teachings.
It's a powerful reminder that spiritual growth isn't about escaping the world, but rather about transforming our experience of it.
Absolutely. And this brings us back to the importance of our senses, which Dr. Dinani highlighted as the foundation of our journey towards knowledge. Rumi, building on a long tradition in Islamic philosophy, emphasizes that our five senses are like the entry point to our experience of the world.
Right. It all begins with what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch.
Ah.
These are like the initial doorways through which we gather information about, the world around us.
Yes. And it's fascinating how Rumi doesn't stop there. He takes this fundamental concept and weaves it into his mystical framework. He encourages us to move beyond the purely physical and engage our senses with, intention and awareness as a way of accessing deeper truths.
So for Rumi, the senses are not just about gathering information about the physical world. They can become pathways to a deeper understanding, even a means of experiencing the divine.
You got it. It's like he's saying, don't just look, see, don't just hear, listen, don't just touch, feel. He's inviting us to go beyond the surface level, to experience the world with this heightened sense of awareness and appreciation.
It's a call to engage our senses fully, to awaken the richness and the beauty of the present moment. But how does this relate to the idea of the five senses beyond the five senses?
That's where things get really intriguing. The five senses beyond the five senses point to a whole other level of perception, a way of sensing the world that transcends our ordinary limitations.
It sounds almost supernatural. Are we talking about, developing psychic abilities or extrasensory perception?
Not necessarily. Rumi believed that this capacity for deeper perception lies dormant within each of us, and that through spiritual practice and refinement we can awaken it. He's not suggesting that it's some sort of special gift reserved for a select few, but rather a potential that we all possess.
So if it's not about developing superpowers, what does it actually look like to cultivate these senses beyond the senses?
Well, it's not as mysterious as it might sound. Rumi emphasized the importance of purifying our hearts, quieting our minds, and cultivating a state of receptivity. He believed that when we create the inner conditions for peace and clarity, we naturally become more sensitive to subtler levels of reality.
So it's like we're tuning a radio to receive a specific frequency. By refining our inner state, we can access this whole range of experiences that were previously unavailable to us.
That's a great analogy. And Rumi suggests that practices like meditation, contemplation, and mindful engagement with the world can help us refine that inner tuning. These are the tools that allow us to move beyond the limitations of our ordinary senses and perceive the world in a more profound way.
It's not about denying our senses, but about transcending them.
Well, yeah.
About using them as a springboard to a deeper experience of reality.
Exactly. And this relates to another insightful point that Dr. Larijanii brought up, highlighting the connection between our inner state and our perception of the world. He quoted a hadith from Imam Sadiq that states, "The cradle in which Satan lulls a person to sleep is heedlessness." In other words, it's our lack of awareness, our state of being lost in thought or distraction that prevents us from seeing clearly. It's like we're sleepwalking through life, missing the beauty and wonder that's right in front of us.
Wow, that's powerful. It suggests that we need to be vigilant to cultivate a state of wakefulness in order to truly perceive the world as it is. It's like we need to wake up from the dream of our own thoughts and preoccupations.
Exactly. And this reinforces Rumi's message about the importance of conscious effort and self-awareness on the spiritual path. It's not something that happens passively. We need to actively cultivate the inner conditions that allow for deeper understanding to emerge.
This reminds me of the verse from the Quran that we talked about in a previous episode about dimensions. To God belongs the East and the West. Whithersoever ye turn, there is the presence of God. It's a beautiful reminder that the divine isn't confined to a specific location or direction, but is present everywhere in every moment.
Yes, it speaks to the omnipresence of the divine, and yet, as you pointed out earlier, we often fail to see it. We get so caught up in our own thoughts, worries, and desires that we miss the sacredness of the present moment.
It's like we're so focused on the map that we forget to look at the territory. We get lost in our mental constructs and miss the direct experience of reality.
And Rumi understood this human tendency, all too well. He knew that we are easily distracted, prone to getting lost in the labyrinth of our own minds.
So if we want to experience that divine presence, that interconnectedness, how do we escape this labyrinth? How do we cultivate that state of awareness that Rumi speaks of?
Rumi suggests that the path lies in turning inward and exploring the depths of our own hearts. He describes the heart as the inner East, the source of our connection to the divine. It's the place where we can access a deeper level of truth and understanding that transcends the limitations of our rational minds.
Oh, I love that. The heart is the inner East, the place where the sun of truth rises within us. It's such a beautiful and evocative image.
It is, and it challenges us to shift our focus from the external to the internal to cultivate the inner landscape of our hearts.
But if the heart is the inner East, does that mean that the five senses are somehow connected to this inner realm? How do they fit into this picture?
That's a great question. And to answer it, we need to explore another fascinating concept that Dr. Dinani discussed. Ili-iri, or common sense. Now, this isn't the common sense we talk about in everyday language, meaning practical judgment. It's a more nuanced philosophical concept that refers to a faculty that integrates the information from our five senses and forms a unified perception of the world.
So it's like a central processing unit that takes in all the sensory data and creates a coherent picture of reality.
Exactly. It's the faculty that allows us to experience the world as a unified whole, rather than as a collection of fragmented sensations. And what's even more fascinating is that Rumi suggests this common sense can also receive input from the inner world, from the realm of the heart and the spirit.
So it acts as a bridge between the outer and inner worlds.
Precisely. And this is where things get really interesting, because Rumi suggests that for those who have purified their hearts and refined their inner perception, this common sense can become a doorway to experiencing the divine, to receiving insights and revelations from beyond the realm of the ordinary senses.
Wow, so it's not just about integrating sensory information, but also about integrating the physical with the spiritual, the outer with the inner.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a holistic awareness that encompasses all levels of our being.
That's incredible. So the more we cultivate our inner awareness, the more sensitive we become to a deeper level of reality.
You're getting it. It's not about developing superpowers, but about refining our perception to such a degree that we become attuned to the subtle presence of the divine in all things.
This is so inspiring. It's like Rumi is giving us a roadmap to awakening, a guide to experiencing the world in a more profound and meaningful way. But I have to admit, it also feels a bit daunting. It's a lot to live up to.
It is a lifelong journey, and there's no need to feel pressure to achieve some sort of ultimate state of enlightenment. The beauty of Rumi's teachings is that they meet us wherever we are on our path.
That's reassuring. So where do we go from here? How do we take all these profound insights and apply them to our lives in a practical way?
That's a question we'll delve into as we continue our exploration in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look at specific practices Rumi suggests for cultivating this inner awareness, for refining our perception, and for experiencing the world with a renewed sense of wonder and connection.
Welcome back to Wisdom Unveiled. I'm still kind of like processing all those fascinating concepts about the senses and common sense and the heart as the inner East from the previous section.
Yeah, it really is quite a journey, isn't it? Rumi's work really challenges us to, expand our understanding of how we perceive the world and how we connect with something greater.
It really does. And I'm thinking a lot of our listeners are probably wondering, like, the same thing I am. How do we actually apply these ideas in a practical way? It's one thing to talk about, purifying our hearts and cultivating inner awareness, but like, what does that look like in everyday life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Thankfully, Rumi doesn't leave us hanging. He offers a wealth of guidance on how to translate these abstract concepts into tangible practices.
Okay, so let's get specific. What are some of the, tools or techniques that Rumi suggests for, cultivating this deeper awareness and refining our perception?
Well, one of the key practices he emphasizes is something that Dr. Dinani referred to as Isar Shmal, which translates to cotton in the ears.
Cotton in the ears. That's an interesting metaphor.
It is. And of course, Rumi isn't suggesting we literally stuff our ears with cotton. He's using this phrase to encourage us to be mindful of what we allow into our hearts and minds.
So it's about like creating a kind of mental and emotional filter, right?
Yeah.
Choosing to focus on what nourishes our souls and turning away from what depletes us.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have a choice in what we consume, not just in terms of food, but also information, relationships, and even like our own thoughts.
That's so important, especially in, today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation. It's like we're swimming in a sea of data, and like not all of it is life-giving.
Very true. And Rumi's advice is to become more discerning, to cultivate a sense of discrimination. He understood that our attention is precious and that we need to be careful about where we direct it.
It's like we need to become curators of our own inner landscape, choosing what we allow to take root and flourish.
I like that analogy. And in order to become more discerning, to really listen to our hearts and make wise choices about what we allow in, Rumi suggests we need to cultivate inner stillness.
Inner stillness. We're talking about practices like meditation.
Exactly. Rumi was a strong advocate for meditation, contemplation, and other practices that, quiet the mind and create space for inner reflection. He understood that in the midst of all the noise and distraction, it can be difficult to hear the whispers of our soul, the guidance of our heart.
It's like that saying, in the stillness, the truth is heard. When we create space for silence, for simply being present with ourselves, then we can start to access a deeper level of awareness and understanding.
Precisely. And it's in that stillness that we can begin to cultivate the five senses beyond the five senses, to refine our perception and attune ourselves to a deeper reality.
It's not about denying our physical senses, but about transcending them, using them as a bridge to a more profound experience of the world.
Yes, and Rumi reminds us that when we engage our senses with awareness and intention, even the most ordinary experiences can become extraordinary.
It's like we're training ourselves to see the world through new eyes, to appreciate the beauty and wonder that's often hidden in plain sight.
And this relates to another beautiful quote by Rumi that you mentioned earlier. Everything you see has its roots in the unseen world. The forms may change, yet the essence remains the same.
Yeah, I love that quote. It speaks to the idea that the physical world is like a reflection of a deeper reality, a manifestation of the unseen.
Exactly. Rumi saw the world as like a tapestry woven from the threads of the divine. And he believed that by cultivating our inner senses, we could begin to perceive the interconnectedness of all things, the unity that binds us together.
It's like we're lifting the veil of illusion and seeing the world as it truly is, a manifestation of the divine, a dance of energy and light.
And it's important to remember that, each of us is on our own unique journey towards this realization. As we were discussing earlier, we each have our own individual capacity for understanding our own level of Aryan.
Right, and there's no need to compare ourselves to others or judge where we are on our path. The important thing is to keep moving forward, to keep seeking and growing, and to trust that the journey itself is a form of grace.
Beautifully said. And Rumi, with his wisdom and compassion, reminds us to be patient with ourselves and to celebrate every step we take, towards the light.
Well, as we come to the end of our deep dive into Rumi's teachings on the senses, I'm filled with a sense of awe and gratitude. It's been such a rich and inspiring exploration of how to cultivate a more meaningful and connected way of being in the world.
I agree. Rumi's words have a way of touching our hearts and awakening something deep within us. I really hope our listeners feel inspired to continue this journey of discovery, to explore Rumi's work for themselves, and to find, their own unique path to a deeper experience of reality.
And as we close, I'd like to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. What practices or approaches resonate most deeply with you? What steps can you take starting today to cultivate a more expansive, compassionate, and interconnected way of experiencing the world? May Rumi's wisdom illuminate your path and guide you towards the light.